The morning sun cast long shadows across Buckingham Palace as tourists gathered to witness the iconic changing of the guard ceremony. Among them stood Jackson Chen, a 32-year-old American martial arts champion whose designer tracksuit and confident swagger immediately set him apart from the crowd. Before we begin, tell us in the comments where you're watching from and make sure to subscribe for more incredible true stories. With 3 international titles under his belt and a chain of elite dojos across California, Jackson embodied success in the combat sports world, his Instagram bio proudly declaring him undefeated, untouchable, unstoppable. Flanked by 4 devoted training partners in matching team jackets, Jackson surveyed the scene with the calculating eyes of a predator, his custom Rolex catching the morning light as he adjusted it dismissively. His attention quickly fixed on guard William Harrington, who stood at rigid attention in his scarlet tunic and towering bearskin cap. To Jackson's trained eye, this was nothing more than ceremonial pageantry, a man playing dress-up rather than a real combatant. "This is what they call security," he scoffed to his entourage, rolling his shoulders through muscles honed by thousands of hours of training. "In my world, a fighter who stands still is just asking to get knocked down." What Jackson failed to recognize were the subtle signs that would have warned a more observant individual. The controlled breathing, the alert eyes beneath the cap's shadow, the perfect military posture that spoke of discipline forged in far more dangerous arenas than any tournament ring. Among the gathering crowd, retired Colonel James Thornton paused during his morning walk, his weathered face showing concern as he observed Jackson's increasingly aggressive body language. After 30 years with the Royal Marines, Thornton had developed an eye for trouble, and everything about Jackson's demeanor screamed confrontation. The martial artist had begun circling Harrington like a predator studying prey, his fluid movements drawing uncomfortable glances from nearby tourists. "Let me show you what a real fighter looks like," Jackson announced, stepping closer to the motionless guard, while his training partners formed a protective semicircle around the impromptu demonstration. Jackson's voice carried the practiced authority of a man accustomed to commanding attention in competition rings as he began his impromptu lecture. "See? A real fighter is always ready, always moving, always aware," he declared, demonstrating defensive stances while the crowd grew larger, phones emerging to capture the spectacle. "Look at this poor guy. They've trained all the fighting instinct out of him. These guards represent a bygone era when standing in formation was considered military prowess." He gestured theatrically toward Harrington, treating the professional soldier like an exhibit in his personal combat museum. The demonstration escalated as Jackson introduced his team: Jin, a 3-time international kickboxing champion, and Marcus, a former welterweight MMA title holder, while boasting about their superiority over ceremonial soldiers who win costume contests. His movements became more aggressive, executing lightning-fast punches that stopped mere inches from Harrington's torso, each strike accompanied by commentary about fighting efficiency developed through thousands of hours facing actual opponents, not standing at attention. The crowd watched in a mixture of fascination and discomfort as Jackson transformed the sacred ground of Buckingham Palace into his personal arena. Colonel Thornton attempted to intervene, recognizing the dangerous trajectory of Jackson's performance, but the martial artist's entourage blocked his approach. "That guard is not what you think he is," Thornton warned urgently, but Jackson was beyond listening, intoxicated by the attention and convinced of his own superiority. The retired officer's military bearing commanded respect, but Jackson's followers dismissed him as just another tourist trying to spoil their leader's demonstration. Meanwhile, several families began ushering their children away from the increasingly tense scene, sensing that a line was about to be crossed. "I think we need a practical demonstration," Jackson announced with the flourish of a ringside announcer, his voice taking on a dangerous edge. "Theory is fine, but nothing teaches like experience. Ladies and gentlemen, I am going to show you exactly why static defense, the kind these guards represent, is fundamentally obsolete in modern combat." He moved into a competition-ready stance, his body language shifting from theatrical to genuinely threatening, as he prepared for what he believed would be the ultimate proof of his superiority over outdated military tradition. The crowd fell into stunned silence as Jackson began his final approach sequence, each movement flowing with the deadly precision of a championship-winning combination. A defender who won't adapt, who can't respond to changing conditions, who remains rigidly committed to outdated protocols, he lectured, building toward his climactic demonstration. Time seemed to slow as he launched into a blindingly fast spinning heel kick aimed directly at Harrington's face, the same technique that had won him tournaments across 3 continents. The impact was audible throughout the courtyard, a sharp crack that cut through the morning air like a gunshot. Jackson's foot connected solidly with Harrington's face, sending the bearskin cap flying in a dramatic arc against the blue London sky. For a heartbeat, Jackson thought he had proven his point decisively. The ceremonial guard had been struck, his dignity apparently shattered, along with his composure. A collective gasp rose from the crowd, followed by absolute silence as the cap completed its trajectory and landed on the courtyard stones with a muffled thud. But something was wrong. Harrington hadn't fallen, hadn't even staggered. His head had snapped sideways with the impact and a thin line of blood traced down from his temple, but his body had absorbed the blow with the resilience of someone who had endured far worse. Most unsettling of all, his eyes, now locked directly onto Jackson's for the first time, showed no pain, no fear, only a cold, focused clarity that experienced combatants would recognize immediately as the look of a professional preparing to engage. "Oh shit," one of Jackson's entourage whispered, the bravado evaporating from his voice as the reality of the situation became clear. For a moment that stretched into eternity, nothing moved. The crowd held its collective breath. Colonel Thornton stopped speaking into his emergency phone call, and Jackson himself stood frozen as the implications of his actions began to dawn on him. Then Harrington moved, and everything changed. What happened next defied Jackson's every expectation about ceremonial soldiers and outdated military training. This wasn't the clumsy response of a man unaccustomed to actual combat. It was the precise, economical motion of a predator who had stalked targets through Afghan mountain passes and Syrian urban warfare zones. Harrington's ceremonial rifle clattered to the stones as he closed the distance between himself and Jackson with a speed that belied his formal attire, moving with the focused intensity of someone executing a mission parameter rather than responding to personal affront. Jackson, to his credit, recognized the immediate danger and shifted into a defensive stance, his tournament-honed reflexes engaging automatically. "Now we're talking," he managed to say, though the confidence in his voice had hollowed considerably. "Let's see what they actually teach you soldiers." But his taunt was cut short by Harrington's first strike, not showy or dramatic, just a textbook perfect combat move delivered with the devastating force of someone who had applied such techniques in genuine life or death situations. The martial artist blocked instinctively, his years of training responding before his brain could fully process what was happening, but the impact still sent him staggering backward. This wasn't the controlled aggression of tournament fighting or the theatrical violence of exhibition matches. This was something far more dangerous and efficient. Harrington didn't speak, didn't posture for the crowd, didn't play to any audience. He moved with the clinical precision of a professional soldier, systematically dismantling an opponent's defenses. Jackson attempted a desperate counterattack, launching the same kick that had won him championships across multiple continents, but Harrington caught his leg in mid-air with casual efficiency. With one decisive motion that spoke of countless hours of close-quarters combat training, the guard took the champion to the ground. The impact drove the breath from Jackson's lungs, his eyes widening with the sudden, humbling recognition that he was catastrophically outmatched by someone he had dismissed as a ceremonial figure. Guard Harrington maintained his position with perfect control, one knee precisely placed on Jackson's sternum, enough pressure to completely immobilize his opponent without causing unnecessary injury. Every aspect of his response demonstrated the kind of disciplined restraint that separated professional soldiers from street fighters or tournament competitors. His expression remained professionally neutral, even as he systematically neutralized what he had correctly assessed as a genuine threat to public safety and military protocol. "Stay down," Harrington spoke for the first time, his voice carrying the quiet authority of command rather than the anger of someone who had been personally assaulted. "This ends now." The words were delivered with the same calm efficiency that had characterized his entire response. No wasted emotion, no theatrical declarations, just the clear communication of someone accustomed to ending confrontations decisively and permanently. Colonel Thornton stepped forward as Jackson's entourage no longer attempted to block his approach. Their earlier bravado completely evaporated in the face of their leader's comprehensive defeat. "I believe," the retired officer addressed the martial artist with military precision, "you've just received a practical education in the difference between performing combat and experiencing it." His words carried the weight of 3 decades of military service and the authority of someone who had both witnessed and participated in real warfare. As palace security personnel arrived with professional efficiency, surrounding the scene with the kind of coordinated response that spoke of extensive training and clear protocols, Jackson struggled ineffectively against Harrington's precise hold. "What the hell?" he managed to gasp. "You can't just—" But Colonel Thornton cut him off with information that hit the defeated martial artist like a physical blow to his remaining pride and assumptions about military service. "Guard Harrington can do considerably more than he's currently demonstrating," Thornton explained conversationally, though his tone carried an edge of steel that made every word unmistakably clear. Before his assignment to the Queen's Guard, he served with the Special Reconnaissance Regiment. 4 combat deployments, 2 distinguished service commendations, and operational experience in environments where your tournament training would prove not just inadequate, but fatally so. The security commander who approached the scene took in the evidence at a glance. The bearskin cap lying on the courtyard stones, the thin streak of blood on Harrington's face, the martial artist pinned beneath one of His Majesty's guards, and his expression hardened with professional recognition of serious criminal charges. "That's assault on a serving member of His Majesty's forces," he informed Jackson, with the detached efficiency of someone who had processed such incidents before. "Disruption of ceremonial duties, public disorder, and I suspect the Crown Prosecution Service will find several additional charges that carry significant penalties." At a subtle nod from his commanding officer, Harrington released his hold on Jackson and rose to his feet with the same fluid precision that had characterized his entire response to the assault. Even without his bearskin cap, with blood still visible on his cheek, he stepped back and resumed a position of parade ground attention, his discipline absolutely unbroken by the confrontation. The ceremonial composure that Jackson had mocked as weakness had proven to be an expression of the same iron self-control that made British soldiers effective in the world's most dangerous combat zones. As the crowd reformed at a respectful distance, many now viewing the guards with a new understanding, born of witnessing genuine military capability in action, Colonel Thornton took it upon himself to educate the assembled tourists about what they had actually observed. "The uniform these guards wear," he explained with patient authority, "represents far more than ceremonial tradition. It is earned through the same rigorous training that produces our nation's combat forces, worn by soldiers who have already proven themselves in actual warfare." An American tourist, still processing what he had witnessed, raised his hand tentatively. "But why have them just standing there if they're actual soldiers? Seems like a waste of all that training." Thornton's smile held the patient understanding of someone who had fielded such questions countless times throughout his military career. "These ceremonial duties rotate among active duty units," he replied. "The soldier standing guard today might have been conducting counter-terrorism operations 6 months ago and may deploy to a conflict zone 6 months from now. Their ceremonial stillness isn't their defining capability. It's simply one expression of the discipline that makes them effective in all aspects of their service." The educational moment continued as a local woman asked why Harrington hadn't responded to Jackson's earlier provocations, why he had seemed to simply accept the humiliation and harassment before the actual assault occurred. Thornton's explanation revealed the sophisticated nature of military protocol that governed such situations. Military regulations establish clear parameters for when a guard may break ceremony and respond to a perceived threat. They are trained to exercise maximum restraint to distinguish between merely irritating behavior and genuine danger that requires intervention. As a palace start, F member approached with a first aid kit to tend to Harrington's injury. The guard maintained his position throughout the medical attention, his discipline remaining absolute even during this necessary break in protocol. Guard Harrington demonstrated that restraint perfectly, Thornton continued, addressing not just the immediate crowd, but the broader audience of smartphone cameras that had captured the entire incident. He responded only when directly assaulted, and even then his response was precisely calibrated to neutralize the threat, rather than inflict unnecessary harm. The Colonel's final words to the assembled tourists carried the weight of someone who had spent decades in service to Crown and country, who understood the true meaning behind the ceremonies that drew millions of visitors to London each year. To stand guard at these posts is considered one of the highest honours in military service. These men are selected not just for their ceremonial precision, but for their exemplary service records, their proven ability to represent the finest traditions of British military excellence, both in peacetime ceremony and wartime service. With a slight smile that softened his formal demeanour, Thornton delivered what amounted to a final assessment of Jackson's spectacular misjudgment. If Mr. Chen had bothered to research before his demonstration, he might have discovered that many of these guards have combat decorations that would fill a display case, achievements far more impressive than any tournament trophy cabinet, earned in service to something greater than personal glory. Hours later, in the sterile environment of the palace security office, Jackson sat alone in his now rumpled designer tracksuit, his championship confidence completely deflated by the reality of criminal charges and the humbling experience of being so thoroughly outmatched by someone he had dismissed as a ceremonial figure. When Harrington entered wearing standard combat fatigues rather than his ceremonial uniform, Jackson stood immediately, his entire body language communicating a respect that had been entirely absent from their earlier encounter. The conversation that followed between the two men revealed the vast gulf between Jackson's world of controlled competition and Harrington's reality of actual military service. "That was SRR training, wasn't it?" Jackson asked quietly, his voice stripped of its earlier performative quality. "I've trained with Special Forces guys from 3 countries. Never seen anything quite like what you did out there." Harrington's response was characteristically economical. "We adapt techniques to operational requirements." Jackson's admission of his complete misjudgment came with surprising honesty and dignity. "I screwed up completely. When I saw you standing there, I saw a target, not a fellow professional. In my world, everything's about demonstrating superiority, proving you're the best. I didn't understand what I was actually looking at." Harrington's acceptance of this apology was equally straightforward. Few civilians do. That's by design. The final exchange between the two men crystallized the fundamental difference between their respective worlds and the harsh lesson Jackson had learned at considerable personal cost. When he asked how Harrington had absorbed a kick that would have felled most men, the guard's response revealed the vast experiential gap between tournament fighting and actual combat service. "When you've had real IEDs detonate nearby," Harrington said simply, "a kick to the face is just another Tuesday." Jackson remained seated long after Harrington left, faced with the humbling realization that there were different kinds of strength in the world, different definitions of courage and skill, and that he had mastered only one of the lesser varieties. His empire of martial arts success, his social media following, his championship titles, all of it seemed diminished by his encounter with a man who had served something greater than personal glory, who embodied a tradition of service and sacrifice that no amount of tournament victories could match. The following day, as dawn light once again cast long shadows across Buckingham Palace, Guard William Harrington stood at his post with his bearskin cap restored and his uniform immaculate. No trace remained of the previous day's confrontation, but the tourists who approached now did so with a markedly different attitude. Their cameras more discreet, their admiration more genuine, their understanding of what they were witnessing fundamentally changed by the viral videos that had already spread across social media platforms worldwide. Colonel Thornton, resuming his morning walk past the palace, paused to observe the scene with quiet satisfaction. The respectful distance now maintained by visitors, the genuine appreciation in their expressions, the absence of the casual disregard that had characterized so many previous encounters, all of it spoke to a lesson learned not through lectures or explanations, but through a demonstration that had revealed the truth behind ceremonial appearances. Sometimes, he reflected, the most effective education about respect and tradition came not through words but through moments when arrogance met reality and reality proved decisively superior. The incident would be remembered not just as entertainment, but as a profound lesson about the dangers of judging by appearances, about the difference between performing strength and possessing it, about the discipline required to serve something greater than oneself. Jackson Chen's humiliation became a viral reminder that behind every tradition lies substance, that ceremony and capability are not mutually exclusive, and that the stillness of a royal guard represents not weakness, but the ultimate expression of military discipline, a discipline tested in the world's most dangerous places and proven in service to crown and country. Don't forget to like this video if you learned something new about the Royal Guards. Subscribe to our channel for more stories that reveal the truth behind ceremonial traditions, and hit that bell icon to be notified when we upload our next video.